Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. A question I'm often asked is, how do I use a modeler live? I tend to have people, guitarists, ask me after gigs, see you're using a modeler, like where's the amp? I often get comments about it on kind of YouTube and Instagram, like how are you getting those tones? And I just wanted to make this video to really cover how I do it, some of the mistakes that I've made along the way, and really how I've come to the current setup that I'm using. There are really three main ways to use a modeler live, and I have actually made notes because I want to make sure I cover all of the pros and cons to each of them, and I'll also offer a few tips as well. Whilst there are three ways, there's kind of a fourth way, which is how I now use my modeler. So stick around to the end of the video and I'll go into that in some detail as well. Okay, so the first way of using a modeler live is to go direct to front of house. What this essentially means is you are taking an output signal from your modeler and going straight into the PA, straight into front of house. There are a whole bunch of pros to this, a few cons, and definitely some lessons that I've learned along the way by doing this. Now the biggest pro is less gear to take to the gig. You don't need to worry about taking an amp, you don't necessarily need to take a speaker or any sorts, you can just take the modeler and in most cases go straight into the desk or maybe via DI boxes, which most sound engineers will provide for you anyway. And it is just super convenient. So some of the bands that I play in, I still go direct to front of house. It's not my favorite way of doing it, but it is super convenient and those gigs are really easy. One of the biggest pros of going direct to front of house is the sound engineers will absolutely love this. If you turn up to a gig and you don't have an amp, most of the time they're going to be relieved that they don't have to mic it up. There are some sound engineers that would still much prefer the sound of an amp on the stage, but I think the way that kind of live music is going, having quieter stages, venues love it, sound engineers love it, so having a modeler direct to front of house really helps in that case. I find this is really useful for festivals as well because you have these really quick changeover times. If you have 10-15 minutes to change over, some amps won't even warm up in time to really kind of give you that tone you're looking for. So you're going to be chasing that as the set goes on. Whereas using a modeler, you're going to have a really consistent sound. You're going to know exactly what it's going to sound like for the most part, which we'll come on to. And it just gives you that peace of mind. Now, for some of the cons of using a modeler direct to front of house, this is entirely subjective. So I get lots of negative comments on these videos. I'm sure this will be no different. But personally to me, it doesn't sound as good as having a real amp. Modelers are amazing. They sound fantastic. 99.9% of the audience are not going to care or notice the difference in the tone or care that you're using a modeler. It's going to sound like a guitar to them. And really that's the crux of it. That's probably the most important thing. However, if you're like me and you like to have the best tone possible, then you may find that using a modeler direct to front of house, you're probably going to be getting monitoring direct from a wedge or perhaps from in-ears. And neither of these are going to sound as good as having like a red hot valve amp just kicking out behind you. But as I said, it's entirely subjective and that's just how I feel. You just have to look at, I think it was Coachella where John Mayer played for a quad cortex. Like nobody in the audience was like, where's the Dumble, man? Like it sounds amazing because it's him playing. They care more about what you're playing than the tone at the end of the day. So I guess that kind of says it all. That being said, you give John Mayer the option, he's going to use his amps. Like look at the sphere residency and all the cool stuff he does with his amps under the stage and things like that. So make your own judgment on that. I have gone to some other gigs recently as well. I actually saw Intervals at a venue in Bristol at the Fleece, and I've seen them a few times before, and the last time I saw them they were using, I think they were using FRFR cabs, which I'm going to come on to in a second. And it sounded really great that time, but the last time I saw them, it just didn't sound as good. You could just tell that something was missing. And I'm talking about a smaller venue where you're probably going to get quite a bit of the sound from the stage, from the backline, even when you're in the audience. And again, I know that people would argue the backline isn't there for the audience, the backline is there for the band. But at the end of the day, if you're used to going to a venue and you're used to hearing loud amps, it's going to sound very different. And to be honest, it did sound a little bit odd. They still absolutely killed it. It was an amazing gig, but it did have me questioning, like, am I missing something? Do I not quite sound as good as I think I do to the audience? Because you're trusting the sound engineer really to get the best tone. Okay, what else have I put? Yeah, I guess on that, just in terms of the PA, you don't always know what you're going to get. If you're providing the PA, so some of the bands I play in, we bring our own equipment, so we know what the PA is going to sound like, we know what kind of tone we're going to get. And even still in those cases, I will kind of opt against going direct, because you're going to be fighting for space in the PA with other instruments, especially if you have other guitarists, perhaps keyboards and things. And if you're using a small PA, your guitar tone is going to suffer as a result of it. So just something to consider. Also, if you're turning up at a venue that you've never been to before, or you haven't seen the tech rider, you might not know what the PA is going to be like. So for smaller venues, just be mindful of that. If you're planning on going front of house and you turn up and the PA is like 40 years old and is just on its ass, then your guitar tone is going to be reflected in that. Festivals are probably the exception, because the audience are not going to be getting as much from the backline, and you get these like nice line arrays of these big PA systems, and whatever you plug into them is probably going to sound pretty good at the end of the day. So I think it probably applies more for smaller venues, which perhaps don't have the best PAs, but just be mindful, your tone is only going to be as good as the weakest link. Usually like we are the weaker link, like the tech is incredible, but it's just something to be mindful of. Okay, so one other thing that I've noted on here, and this actually applies to all of these approaches, is your modeler is a single point of failure. So if your modeler breaks, what are you going to do about it? It's something to be mindful of, and it's something that I've considered making a video about. So if you're interested in this, I guess it's like I don't know, like resilience in your rig, then let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to make a video about it, because I'm really kind of nerdy about that stuff. Okay, so moving on to the second way of using a modeler live, using an FRFR speaker. So FRFR, if you haven't heard of this before, it stands for full range, full response. Let me just double check. Okay, so according to AI, it stands for real. But what we're talking about today is full range flat response. So what this is essentially saying is you have a speaker, which is a bit like a PA speaker in a way. It's just designed to be able to replicate all frequencies very evenly. Well, within a range, but a range of frequencies very evenly. To the point where you're probably going to get more of a hi-fi sound from an FRFR speaker with a modeler than you would through a traditional valve amp, in my experience. Now, I think it's really important just to say this is from my experience. This isn't just from stuff that I've kind of read. I do have the Fender FR-12, and when I got it, I used it a bunch. But to be honest, it's kind of gathering dust now. It's not my favorite way of using a modeler live. I think the only way that the only times I do tend to use it is if I'm trying to do like some really high gain stuff, because the amp that I'm currently using, it doesn't really lend itself to that. But anyway, let's get into it. So if you are turning up at a gig and you're not using in-ears, or you want to be able to hear your amp behind you, then an FRFR is a great way of doing this. It's going to give you that stage volume. It's going to react a bit like an amp in the sense that it's going to potentially feed back if you get really close to it, if you're using really high gain. But it's also, it's just going to feel a bit more real to you as a guitarist. And to be honest, the experience of using an FRFR is better than just going front of house and having a wedge in front of you, or even going in-ears. I use in-ears in all my bands, and to be honest, whilst it's convenient and it saves my hearing, it just doesn't sound or feel anywhere as good as having an amp behind you. They're super light because they don't have like transformers in them. I mean, they probably do have transformers in them, but not to the same extent that a valve amp does. A lot of the weights from a valve amp will be in the two transformers and in the speaker. With an FRFR speaker, you're getting a really light speaker. You're getting usually like a pine cabinet. They don't weigh a lot at all, so they make loading really easy. I really like the versatility of using an FRFR speaker because, like going front of house, you can still use different like amp models, you can use different speaker emulations or impulse responses on your modeler, and you can still get that sound back from the FRFR speaker. Like front of house, you can still go direct into the PA. So if your modeler only has a limited number of outputs on it, and you are kind of sending them all to speakers, for example, certainly the Fender FR-12, it has a line out on there, so you can still take an output from the amp or from the speaker directly into the desk. One thing I have noticed is it's really hot. It's quite a high output compared to what comes out of the modeler, so just something to be mindful of. And I guess one other advantage, kind of going back to what I was saying, is you're much less dependent on the PA. So if you are playing in a smaller venue where you are having less of the guitar, or maybe no guitar through the front of house, through the PA, then you have much more control. You're not necessarily fighting for space as much. So it's just another option. It's a way of not having to depend on things that are outside of your control, which is often the case when using like a house PA. So some of the negatives of using an FRFR, as I kind of alluded to, in my opinion, it doesn't sound as good as a real amp. It does sound really good, especially if you're using good presets, if you're using a good modeler, but it doesn't have the same punch that a valve amp has. Certainly to my ear, it doesn't compress in the same way. So I think you get a lot more from a real amp in that regard, and it just feels a bit, like I said, punchier. It just feels a bit more alive when you're using a real amp. But an FRFR is going to get you much closer to that than obviously not using one, just going straight to front of house. If you're playing at a festival, then there's a good chance that you're going to be probably stood quite far away from your amp, or you might be on in-ears. So using an FRFR speaker, it feels slightly unnecessary because you're probably going to have some monitoring. Like I said, if you're on ears or if you have a wedge or a side fill, it's going to sound pretty much the same as an FRFR speaker. So if you're rocking up at a festival, I would probably just go direct. That's my advice. Okay, so finally, the third and kind of fourth way of using a modeler live is to use it with a real amp. So this could be with a solid state amp, it could be with a tube amp, but I've only tried it with a tube amp, so that's what I'm going to talk about. Now there are two ways to do this. The most common way, and some modeler manufacturers actually kind of recommend this, so they include it in their instructions, is to go direct into the effects loop, or the send and return, depending on how you refer to it. And what you're effectively doing by plugging your modeler in is you're bypassing the entire front end of your amp. You're not using any of the preamp. So all you're going to be using is the power amp, and you're getting all of that amplification and also the sound of that speaker and the sound of that cab, but you can still use whichever preamp you want to use on your modeler. Now, something to be mindful of here is because you are using a real amp with a real speaker in it, you need to take out any speaker blocks on your patches from your modeler, because what's effectively happening is that speaker block is kind of like an EQ on your tone, and it's going to be taking out a whole bunch of low end and a whole bunch of high end, and it's going to be rolling off these frequencies. And then some fun in the middle, which is kind of what gives the speaker its character. You need to take that out because you have the speaker in there which is doing it anyway. And this kind of goes on to some of the cons, which I'll come on to in a second. But certainly in terms of the kind of positives, it gives you that super punchy valve tone with the modeler kind of convenience. You can still choose to use a Marshall or a Fender preamp, but you get the power amp, you get that valve power amp from your amp, you get that nice speaker, and it just feels better. I think it sounds a lot better than an FRFR speaker, as I mentioned. And it's going to sound better to the audience as well. If they're getting a lot of the guitar from the stage, if they're hearing your amp as opposed to hearing it through the PA, then providing you have a decent valve amp, then it's going to sound good for the audience as well. So I know I said the audience probably won't care either way, so bear that in mind, but you know, it is something to consider. a bit like an FR speaker, you're still going to get the reaction. I think it's more authentic in how it reacts, certainly the way that it feeds back, but also just kind of the responsiveness. It's just more authentic as a player. Now, in terms of the negatives, you are kind of limited compared to the other two options. So as I said, you are going to be kind of constrained to using that single speaker that is in your amp, because you can use different emulations, but whatever you're sending into the amp, it's still going to come out of that speaker. It's still going to sound like that speaker. So you are slightly limited, and depending on the type of music you play, that might be absolutely fine. Certainly for me, when we play like the 80s music, I used to use like lots of different amp emulations, and I would use speaker combinations that suit those amps. So if I'm using like a Marshall, it might have like some greenbacks in the speaker block, and then if I'm using a Fender, I might use something like a Jensen. But that's just something to be mindful of, something to consider. They are really heavy valve amps, so if you kind of struggle with loading in, or you want to keep it really easy, then using a valve amp with a modeler is probably not the way to do it. Like I said, it's going to be difficult to kind of load it in and out. If you're playing festivals and you have that short changeover time, a lot of the time they will actually tell you not to bring an amp. They will say just use what we provide. But you know, depending on the festival, they're kind of flexible on what you do. And then I guess the final con of using a valve amp is there's the risk of it breaking. You know, you have more variables. I guess you could argue there are more things that could go wrong, especially if you're transporting valve amps around things. It's not unusual for kind of valves to work their way loose or to blow. You know, there's an excellent recording of Lynyrd Skynyrd like blowing up a valve amp at the end of Call Me the Breeze, and like it's an amazing moment, but it's good that it happened at the end of the song. You and I might not be so lucky. Okay, so those are the three ways that you can really use a modeler live. As I said, I actually use it slightly differently now. I have tried and tested all of these approaches, hence you know why I've kind of come to these pros and cons. If there are any that I've missed, please do let me know in the comments below, because I'm hoping this can kind of become I guess like a resource for people that are looking into this and just really want to make an informed decision based on other people's experiences. So please do share that below. The way that I am currently using a modeler and an amp live, I do use them together. I try to avoid using one or the other. Is I'm using the Helix, and I'm using this amp here, which is it's my new amp from Vice Amplification, which I will make a video about. But it's essentially it's a 40 watt hand wired valve amp, so it's super clean. I was lucky enough to try different speaker combinations, and really find what works for me. So I now have a Jensen C12N in here. Now, that speaker isn't going to be as good for kind of like heavy music, loud music, as kind of like distorted tones as a creamback. And I did try a creamback in there, but I found I preferred the sound of the Jensen overall. I think for this amp, it was the best tone. This video isn't about the amp. So I use the Helix, and I actually use it in the 4 cable method. So because I've got this amp that I love, I want to use the preamp that is in this amp. I'm not actually using a model on the modeler. So I'm going into the Helix. I have things like my drives, anything that I want to happen before the preamp, and then I send all of the signal into the amp, and I use an effects loop from the amp into the Helix for delays and reverbs. The amp does have a reverb, so I sometimes use that. I actually always use that in one of the bands, but for things like the 80s music, I will use the reverbs on the Helix because they're very different to a spring reverb. This isn't the most kind of economical way of doing it. It's a lot of cabling. I have to take a lot of gear to the gig, but it's effectively what I kind of prefer. It's what I enjoy playing through the most. By using the Helix for all of the drives and the other effects, I can have my snapshots, I can have my presets all dialed in. So I have set lists with different presets per song, and then I don't even need to write down a set list because I know when I press next on the Helix, that is the next song, and I know what's happening. So it's just really convenient for me. It works with my workflow. In terms of actually kind of getting the sound of the amp into front of house, I'm just using an SM57 on there, and I'm basically using like an amp clamp, so I kind of always have the mic in the same position. It's just kind of off center, sort of like on the gluey bit of the cone. I'm sure there's a name for it, I don't know what it is. And I really like it. Like, it feels good, it sounds good to me. I will more often than not pull out an in-ear just so I can listen to the amp. I always do it on a solo because I just like to listen to it. But I keep them in for the most part just to protect my hearing. So that's really it. There are lots of different ways to use a modeler live, and the same goes for using a modeler at home. If you're interested in sort of how to use your modeler at home for practicing and recording and stuff, again, let me know in the comments. I'll happily make a video about it because that is a whole different ball game altogether. But please share your experiences. Let me know how you use a modeler live. Do you use it with a real amp, or do you just go direct to front of house? What works best for you, and why have you kind of settled on that approach? Let's, like I said, let's make this a resource for people to kind of find out more about the topic, and hopefully avoid making the mistakes that we've all made when using a modeler live, because for the most part it can be super convenient, but other times it can just be the opposite, and we might wish that we took an amp to the gig. So yeah, please share your experiences in the comments below. Let me know if this video has been helpful to you. If you didn't find it useful, or if I've missed anything, again, just please give me some feedback before you kind of hit that thumbs down button, because I just want to make sure that I'm sharing information that is valuable to you. But as always, my name's Craig. Thank you for checking out the channel. Thank you for checking out this video. Go play your guitar.